It's here. The Ray Merriman Forecast 2025 audiobook is now available for sale. And I can say with 100% confidence, knowing how astrology works, I would not want to enter 2025 without the information in this book. And that's how important I feel it is for you. Learn about the Aries vortex, the new era, AIRA, and Ray's incredible insights into 2025 and beyond. To order yours, go to the top of hightimelinebooks.com, and it will link you directly to the book. Hey, Robert.
Yes?
We have a very loyal Canadian listener who I just adore and I love, and she has a question for us.
Hello, Thomas and Robert. I'm just wondering about willing some money to my grandson, and if there would be anything in the grandchild's astrological chart that would indicate a good age to release it. I was thinking his first Saturn return around age 30, but I just wanted to get some advice from you people first before I go to my lawyer and have the will drawn up. Thanks for all you do. I love the podcast.
And we love you. And what's really cool is if you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you listened to that question and you took it about 2 steps past what she asked on the surface, then you're doing well if you came up with the same thing. I compared notes with Robert on this before we started recording, and exactly we had the same additional questions or additional directions to go with this question. Robert, the first one that I love is that here is somebody who listens to this podcast. She is on her highest timeline, as I love to say. She's on her spiritual path. And before she called the lawyer, she called us. I love that. She wanted an astrological perspective on this very important life decision.
I love her instincts. I'm thinking around age 30 on his Saturn return. This is a very practical, it may be an intuitive approach on her part, but it's a very practical time to be considering making the inheritance available to this grandson, nephew,
grandson.
I've seen this in my own family, my second family by my dad's second marriage, which involved a lot of money, none of it for me, but for her, my dad's second wife, 2 grandchildren. She was a Scorpio. These boys were 2 years apart, and she was, let's just say, fairly manipulative about money. She made one of the boys able to get his inheritance at 24. She made the other one get his inheritance at 26. So already she's making a value judgment simply by the ages that she chose to make her funds available to those boys. So that sets up a competition, unconscious, but you can't help it. So, well, why would she give him the money when he's 24 and make me wait until I'm 26? That's all subconscious. But she's very right about the Saturn return, because that really is when human beings tend to mature. We're all told we're supposed to know exactly what we want to do in life at 21 and get married and start having children and have our career. It's too early for human beings. But 28, 29, 30, your Saturn return, that's a very good time, because you can tell by that age whether a person is going to be handling their lives reasonably maturely. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're the president of the bank or even that they have necessarily settled into a career yet, but they probably have. So it means that they will tend to be wiser with their using her inheritance instead of running out and buying a Maserati. You see what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So her thinking is very on target. And I don't know that I'm thrilled that she consulted astrology before the attorney, but intuitively, she had already settled on that age and that astrological marker of the Saturn return. She's a very wise woman.
She is indeed, and she is on a great path, and she's been such a loyal supporter of this podcast, Fun Astrology, Subconscious Mind Mastery, the whole package. So here, I'm going to throw a different twist, because I had this happen, and I'm not going to go into that story of my own life right now, but I had this happen, and I'm going to suggest you might take a look at the time frame of the Uranus opposition, which happens broadly between about 40 and 42, and stick on another couple of years. Now, here's what I'm thinking. First of all, I'm a really big believer that money transferred should be in some kind of managed trust for the benefit of the kids, to let it grow for that additional decade, from what Robert was talking about, late 20s, early 30s, to what I'm talking about, basically mid-40s. Let the money grow. And then, after that Uranus return, that's when people go nuts. That's when people go bonkers crazy. The Saturn return is a passage from basically youth to adulthood. It's when we start adulting, from there to the second Saturn return in the late 50s. That's the time of, now you've had the kids maybe, or you'll have a few more. Now you're raising them. Now you're accumulating assets. You've built yourself a career. You have some sustainability. But there are a lot of challenges still in the 30s. Then you have the opportunity, and I don't know if this affects men or women more, but you have the opportunity to just go completely nuts in your early 40s. The 7-year itch, the whole thing of what happens when Uranus is opposite itself in your natal chart in the sky. And then you kind of get your life back together. And if that pot of money has set off to the side and is well managed and has grown, and then you make it available like in the mid-40s, that person then either is going to spend it on drugs and motorcycles, or is going to have gotten all that out of their system, the growth period, and it also makes them lean on their own career a little bit more instead of that pot of money that they think might be coming. So, two different ways of looking at it, but I just have seen this in practical application. And also, this dynamic of what happened in your family of creating tension. Don't create tension in the family. I've just am living that out right now, and it is absolutely not how you want to leave your legacy, because I've seen the damage that has been doing firsthand. Now, here's where we both compared notes and said, okay, and you guys remember, we've been talking about how to find your children and grandchildren in your chart. And I told Robert, I said, the other question that I want to ask you is, can she look into the chart and see if that grandchild is going to receive that money wisely and well? And that might help her make the decision between Saturn return or Uranus opposition. So, Robert, could she look in the chart, and if so, where, and what would she be looking for of how that grandchild might handle that money?
Well, if she's looking at her own birth chart, then she wants to look at either her daughter or her son, whichever one parented that child. Now, it takes two to make a baby, but only one is her child. The other one is, in essence, an in-law. So if it's her daughter's baby, then she wants to look, if she's had more than one child, she wants to know the order of that daughter in the child sequence that she, this mother, gave birth to, or this grandmother. So her first child in a woman's chart is ruled by her fourth house. And let's just say, for argument's sake, her first child was that daughter. And her second child, let's say, was a son. Her third child was maybe another daughter. But it's her first grandchild that she's asking about. Let's just say again, for the sake of argument. Then she's going to look at her fourth house for that daughter, and that daughter's baby, which is her grandson. And now it depends on, is this 30-year-old grandson, let's say, was that her daughter's first baby, her second baby, her third baby? Are you following me so far?
Yeah, and this is indeed where it gets complicated. So I'm just going to bail out now on the default.
Okay.
If you're sitting there trying to scratch this out on a napkin, you might want to get a hold of Robert for a consultation on this, because it does get complicated. But go ahead. I mean, and it's also hard to explain audibly. You can explain it with visuals a little better, but yeah, just keep going. And you guys remember, as you listen through this, scratch down what he's saying. You can draw it out, but it also is complicated, and just respect that, and you don't want to make a mistake. So the best thing on something like this, if you really were serious about nailing this down would be to get a consultation. I'm just going to say that. Okay, carry on.
Well, this gets into, as Thomas says, it sounds complicated, and it can be, but it's derivative houses. If you know where that woman needs to look in her horoscope for which one of her children had this baby, then once you identify that house, then you can identify where this grandson comes in. So let's just say this woman had two children. She had a daughter first, and then she had a son. And let's say this grandson that she's talking about leaving this inheritance to is her daughter's first baby, and that daughter had two children. All right, her daughter is ruled by this woman's fourth house, her first child. That daughter's first child is ruled by the daughter's fourth house, which is the original seventh house. And that would be where you would read this grandson. If the grandson she's talking about was her daughter's second child, then that would be the ninth house in the original chart. Let's say her daughter at the fourth house, her first child, that would be that daughter's sixth house, which is that daughter's second child. So this is all derivative houses. It sounds complicated, but the more you study astrology and you understand how to use derivative houses, you can get very specific from the grandmother's chart. You don't need the daughter's chart. You don't need the grandson's chart. You can see how that grandson will handle money from this grandmother's chart.
So what are you looking for in the seventh or the ninth?
Well, that would be the house that rules the grandson in particular. So I'm making it more complicated. Let's say the grandmother had two kids. As I said, the first one was a daughter. That's ruled by the grandmother's fourth house. That grandmother's second child maybe was a son. That would then be ruled by her sixth house. But it's the fourth house that rules her first child, the daughter, who had this baby. Let's say that woman, her daughter, had two children. That daughter's fourth house in derivative houses would be the grandmother's seventh house, the fourth from the fourth. And that would rule her daughter's first child. If that daughter had a second child, it would be the third from the seventh or the original ninth. I know it sounds complicated, but this is because if she has more than one child, the woman's first child is ruled by her fourth house. Children in general are ruled by the fifth. If this grandmother only had one baby, this daughter, that child is ruled by the fifth. But if this grandmother had more than one baby, then her first child ruled by the fourth, her second child ruled by the sixth, her third child, if she had three, would be ruled by the eighth, and so on. So that's how you can use derivative houses to identify the mother of this son that she's thinking about leaving the inheritance to. And then again, using derivative houses, starting with the house in the grandmother's chart that rules this daughter, you can count out in derivative houses to find which one of those rules this particular grandson. And then you mentally place that house on the first house of the grandson and read it in derivative houses like any other chart. The grandson will handle his money through his second house in the derivative houses. So I know it sounds complicated, but that's the method.
Yeah. So in that scenario, the seventh house, that's the grandson's now first house. So you would look to the eighth house of how that grandson might manage his money, because that's his second derivative house. All right, so let's say that there's Uranus in Sagittarius in that eighth house. And again, I know this is placing an importance on the equal house system of how you do this, because you got to watch what that cusp is. If you're in whole sign, it could very easily change, for example. But let's say that Uranus was in Sagittarius in that eighth house, and you look at that and say, this kid may not be out of his party years by the time he's 30. Maybe we ought to give it a little more time. Or maybe you have Saturn in Capricorn in the eighth, and you think, well, if I pass this money on early, this kid's going to grow this money, and he's going to be diligent with it. Would that be how you might look at those two
Yeah,
possible
I mean,
scenarios?
let's say he had Uranus and Sag, taken alone, that can be very impulsive with money
Yeah.
and thoughtless and careless
And it
with
can
because
come and
it's
go.
impulsive.
Yeah, exactly.
But if that son, or grandson, happens to be in a technological field, if he's in a medical field like psychology, that also corresponds to Uranus and Sag. Both of those do. So would a career as a race car driver. So would a career as a pilot. If he's in a career that fits the description of Uranus and Sag in his second house, then he's likely to handle the money okay. If he is still looking for his career and he has a 30-year history of Uranus and Sag and money, being interested in this and then being interested in that and then getting married to this one and then getting divorced, and he's shown a history of 30 years of kind of being erratic and impulsive with money, that's also fitting that Uranus and Sag description. So you want to look at the Uranus and Sag and see what aspects are made to it from other planets to get a better handle on, even though he may be in a Uranian field, is he handling money well? Is he succeeding in that field? As opposed to be running from this goal to that goal and never really finishing anything. And he has a desire to buy a flashy car, or maybe he's, as you mentioned, into drugs. So you can have to take those considerations into account. But you can absolutely use it to get a good handle on how that boy will handle money.
Well, and another one that I'm thinking about is we're working on this very important program called Conflicted Mutables that we'll be releasing in 2025. You might look at the structure of his chart and what conflicts does he have with mutable signs? How many mutable signs? Is he a mutable sign? Gemini, for example. All the mutables, we're going to talk about all of them in the program. You could look at that versus is the primary structure of his chart fixed, for example. Fixed might be more inclined to hold on to the money. Mutable might be more inclined, some professional advice and some management might be best to keep it in the family and keep it intact.
Good points.
Well, thank you to our listener. She is just such a treasure in my world, and I wanted to spend some time helping her think through this. And you might want to pick up if you're very, like now you're going, what? Just get a hold of Robert and work it out that way would be the best. Thank you guys so much for listening. The show notes has the contact information, including his new website, which is brilliantly designed and looks great. So it's there in the show notes or the description on YouTube. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time with more great listener questions.